This is the Made for Living Well podcast, hosted by Alexa Sherm, the place to create a life well lived.
Welcome back to the podcast. As always, my name's Alexa, and we are in the middle of a podcast series called Health School. Now, this is a long podcast series because I really want to lay out a foundation for what it means to create health, to live out what's already inside of you. And often that's backwards from what we've been taught, and thus it takes a bit of digesting to fully understand it. That's why we're breaking these down into generally short episodes of 20 to 30 minutes. However, occasionally I'm bringing on a guest, like today, where we're going to dive in deeper to a specific topic. Now, today I am thrilled to have on the show Jessica Ash, who is a functional nutritionist, integrative health coach, and creator of Fully Nourished, an online course providing women with the complete blueprint to eating for hormone and metabolic health. Jess teaches simple, no-nonsense approach to health and wellness that help burned out and overwhelmed women regain energy and clarity in their lives. She has multiple holistic nutrition certifications from respected institutions and has spent hundreds of hours studying biology, anatomy, endocrinology, and nutritional biochemistry. And as you can tell, we have so much in common. And today on the podcast, we're specifically going to dive into feminine energy and masculine energy and what that role is in our metabolic health. I am pumped to have Jessica on the show. If you love this information, make sure you follow her at jessicaashwellness.com or find her on social media at Jessica Ash Wellness. You are going to love today's podcast. So let's get right to it and welcome Jessica to the show. Welcome to the show, Jessica. It's such an honor to have you on and to talk about a subject that I think is a really big concept in the health space. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Alexa. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, today we want to talk about feminine and masculine energy. I feel like this concept is getting a little bit more chatter in this space. I think a lot of people are really starting to grasp onto it or want to know more because it does answer a lot of questions. I think about what people are really looking for. So much of health has been like a destination. I want to arrive here. And I'm constantly breaking that myth. You are too, that it's more of this way of life. So can you introduce us to why this topic has mattered to you? Like your story of uncovering this, being in the health space yourself.
Yeah. So my journey started, I was actually very interested in the fitness space. I was all about fitness. I started off as a group fitness instructor and a personal trainer. And that led to work with a lot of women who were just naturally like more middle-aged. And then later on in their years, a little bit more, I don't even like to say elderly, but more just like in their 60s and 70s, they had really started to see, I think a lot of times we forget that the metabolic issues that begin in our younger years, they really start to rear their ugly head around like late 30s and 40s. That's when we really start to realize like, man, this yo-yo dieting, all of these kind of fad things that we chase, it's no longer working for us. But a lot of women still feel like it's just, I just need to cut calories. I just need to exercise more.
Yeah.
And so here I was being trained. I was being trained kind of traditionally, calories in, calories out. And I'm really realizing very quickly, this is not working for me. And this is not working for any of the women that I'm working with. And that just started my deep dive into the rabbit hole of female physiology. And what I realized pretty quickly is that very little research is done on the female metabolism.
Right.
About 6% of research in the health and fitness space is done on women. And even less than that is done on cycling women. A lot of it is done on women who are on birth control, which kind of shuts down the cycle, or menopausal women because they don't have the cycle anymore. Because our menstrual cycle is a wild card. Our metabolism shifts all cycle long. And it's hard to pinpoint research when that's happening.
Right.
So I was like, there's very little answers here. This is crazy to me. And that led me down realizing that I have to really study female physiology. I have to understand how it functions. And then I need to understand how the hormones of the body and the nutrients that we consume interact with that physiology. And that has led me for the past about decade now into really trying to learn feminine physiology. And so in the past couple of years, my work led me to really focusing on the physical aspects of that, the nutrition principles, the nourishment. I taught a lot about the kind of a pro-metabolic or a metabolically supportive way of eating, similar to you, where you're focusing on how the body generates its own energy.
Right.
But I was realizing pretty quickly that here are all these women kind of flooding the space, and they're treating a metabolically supportive way of eating kind of like another diet. It's like, I'm going to just do all these rules, these steps, and like, oh my gosh, why is it not working for me? I'm gaining all this weight, or I feel horrible. What's going on? And after a couple of years of this, of just kind of making some observations and then going through my own kind of place of burnout, which I've talked about on my podcast, I recognized pretty quickly that there's something very much deeper going on with our physiology than just what we're eating, nutrition, nutrients, bioavailable protein, all of these kind of keywords. And even I was noticing this kind of happening in the nervous system space as well. It was like, heal your trauma, heal your trauma, heal your trauma. And it kind of started to I just started to notice, like, it's all about this set of rules. Like, okay, we do all these things, we check this off our list, and then we'll get to where we're trying to go. And I just started to notice that this underlying feeling of just absolute weariness in the health space amongst women. Like, women are weary and they are overloaded with information, and they're not really getting much better. They're kind of just like chasing their tail. It's like a dog chasing their tail. And I started to realize, like, this goes so much deeper, and it goes into how we're approaching health and how we're approaching life itself. And I kind of had this aha moment of like, oh my gosh, all of these things I've learned up to this point, like, it all just kind of came together. And I start to really recognize that from an energetic standpoint, if we are continuously in what I call masculine energy, and I think the feminine, the masculine kind of still seems a little bit woo-woo to some people, or like people are catching on, but a lot of the information is kind of like surface level. This energy concept is, if we are out of alignment with who we really are on a cellular level, no amount of nutrition, no amount of nervous system healing techniques, none of that will fix the fact that we are living in what I call an energetic state, like a black hole. We're in a black hole where no matter how much energy we intake we have, we will never be able to balance it out with the amount of energy that's being sucked out of us, because we're constantly trying to live in a state that does not work for our system. Our system is not designed for it. And our society is very much a masculine oriented, very action oriented culture. It's almost like written deep into our bones that if we don't succeed and we don't hustle and we don't achieve and we don't check things off our lists, like, what are we even here for? Are we even worth anything? Do we have any value? And that is kind of the next step of, we are in this continuous nervous system state, but even deeper, a cellular state of just going, and never settling into who we actually are.
Yeah. It's a, like you said, it's a really deep concept. And last summer I did an entire podcast series called The Sex Talk. And we really dove into the understanding that our sexual energy also makes up that feminine and that masculine energy. And there is a balance to it. It's not, I think when we hear masculine energy, we only think of, oh, that's for men, but there is a balance inside of our body. And I think this is a hard concept for people to understand because we're so black and white thinking. Obviously that's a survival trait, but how can you explain this balance that we all have inside of us and what that kind of looks like in our lives? Because we tend to pull it to an extreme, right? Like, what is a healthy masculine feminine energy balance and a female and a male look like?
Yeah. So I guess how I would explain it, I would rewind a little bit to remind women that our menstrual cycle, or the cycle that we go through, usually it's around 28 days, it is composed of this like symphony of moving hormones where every day is slightly different. And as we enter the cycle, as we start our bleed, and then you'll kind of see this gradual rise begin to happen, and everything is happening to almost surround the idea of reproduction, or what I like to say is co-creative energy, where women have a specific ability to tap into the creative energy of the world around them and create life. And so there are things that need to happen and coordinate to make this happen. And it can't be something that you're in a constant state of, because if you were, it would just be too much. It's too energy consuming.
Yeah.
We as women consume a lot of energy internally to keep our cycle moving. It's a constant kind of dynamic rhythm. And so as our cycle shifts and changes, you kind of see that the body is really focused on bringing everything towards this height or this pinnacle at ovulation. And when ovulation occurs, there does need to be a balance of masculine and feminine energy, because masculine energy is the energy of action, of doing, of moving forward, of almost progression in a way. Whereas feminine energy is all of the spaces in between, I would say, where feminine energy is the thing that you can't always see moving, but it's just there. And it's what completes everything. And without it, everything falls apart. Because if you're just moving forward with no consciousness, it's just going to create this kind of hustle and bustle, this feeling of, I can never stop. I need to keep going. I need to keep growing. I need to keep moving, but I can't settle and just enjoy what has occurred, or I can't settle and just be. And so in women, the balance of masculine and feminine it needs to stay in perfect balance, like you said. Women, I think right now, social media, it makes it hard, because we kind of see these groups of like trad wives. I would say that would be my great example of like this idea of like, feminine energy is wearing dresses and baking bread and doing these things. And again, it's turned into this kind of transactional or action-based energy where it's like, I must do this, and this to be feminine. But that's not really what it is. It is allowing and believing and surrendering to a process that is bigger than yourself, and to allow the flow and the rhythm of it, and to let go of the control. And when women live in a state of just imbalanced masculine energy, when there's so much masculine energy, they're finding themselves just holding on. They just hold on. They're holding onto control, and they cannot surrender and be within the rhythm of their own bodies. And therefore, I guess we could say the universe or what's around them. So this balance is important, because without masculine energy, you kind of would just settle and just be content with everything, and you wouldn't really want to improve or move forward at all. But too much masculine energy, and you're going to just be constantly stuck, almost like in a river current, where you're just pulled to just keep going. And if you stopped for a second and just relaxed and just let yourself be, you'd be like, what am I doing all of this for? I'm just stuck in this kind of state of constantly moving forward. So for women, we have physiology that requires us to be mostly in a state of feminine energy, which is we need a lot more space. We need to move slower, more gently. We need to almost like think before we act, but not overanalyze, but actually tune into our intuition before we act. The feminine state is really about being in a place where you are aligned with your own system and your own body. And that is what dictates your choices and your lifestyle, not the other way around.
Yeah. And that really does impact the cells inside of our body. And I think there's like this, I think people are still trying to piece together that mind-body connection, or our lifestyle influencing our cells. Can you dive into how does this influence those cells?
Yeah. So I think a lot of women right now are focusing on trying to heal their metabolism. They're focused on trying to heal their nervous system. And as they become more aware, I've noticed when you begin this kind of nourishment journey and you really start to realize, okay, this is not like a destination I'm moving towards. This is not a 90-day goal. This is more of like a lifestyle.
Yeah.
This is a state of being that I want to be in. As you nourish yourself on the cellular level and you give your body what it needs, the nutrients, the proteins, the carbs, the fats, you start to often see a whole new world open to you, because now you actually have the energy to see, you have the energy to perceive, you have the energy to think, and you can think in nuance now. You're not so in a sympathetic state where it's like fight or flight, right? Like I'm going to just people please all the time. I'm going to see things in a black and white situation. I don't have time to think about anything. I just keep kind of almost women live in a state constantly of just kind of going through the motions almost. And if they stopped for a second to rest and truly rest, they would realize how unhappy they are and how just unfulfilled and how much they don't feel well. And so oftentimes they think that state of movement is a survival response. It's like, I just got to keep going because if I stop, I'm going to crumble and fall. And so as you start to restore your metabolism, a lot of times you start to see things a lot more clearly. And as you start to focus on your nervous system, or at least become more aware of it, you start to recognize, man, these are patterns and behaviors that like maybe are not serving me anymore, or they're not serving me. Why am I doing them? And that's really what leads to that deeper, like you start to really recognize there's something deeper here going on. I would say a majority of the women that I've worked with, eating well and nourishing well and focusing on that mind-body connection only takes them so far, because if they're still engaging in the same patterns and the same behaviors and showing up in the same, like what I like to say is showing up in the same spirit, this kind of I just got to get through it, or to multitask and get all this stuff done at the same time, or rush through this thing, or I have to do, like they're wearing the burdens of their life on their shoulders. No amount of nourishment, no amount of nervous system techniques are going to fix that. It is you living out of alignment with who you are. And that leads to what I call energy black holes, or sucks, where you're losing so much energy trying to remain in a state that is unnatural to you. And you're going to be wondering, why are my temps still low? Why are my pulses still low? Why am I still so exhausted? Why do I feel so disconnected from my life? And it's because the way that you're showing up in these things is not working for you. It's not conducive to who you are on a cellular level. And this can be very metabolically destructive for us, because it does keep us in a low grade state of fight or flight. If we are in a constant state of rush, never slowing down, never being in the present moment, we're always stuck in the future or the past, that is going to start to slow down our thyroid, because our adrenals are going to be working harder. We're going to be in constant patterns of what I call bracing, where our muscles are actually bracing for impact. So we're constantly worried about the next thing, right? We're constantly thinking about any possible negative thing that can occur in the next moment. So worry and overwhelm are often a sign of a poor metabolism, but staying in a place of worry and overwhelm actually leads us to spend a lot of energy creating what I call negative fairy tales in our head, where we spin all these stories of all these things that could possibly be happening. Have they happened yet? No. Are they going to happen? I don't know. We don't have crystal balls. We seem to think we're psychics and predict the future. And we're seriously living out these stories in our own head, spending so much energy, so much time just in there, just worrying about every little thing. And that is an energy waster. No wonder we cannot get a handle on our metabolic state.
Right. Because we're just constantly like living in the state that is just pulling us out of balance, while we're also living in this world that's constantly telling us to go find ourselves, to go seek ourselves. Like it is a really, it's like this push and pull. Like we can't find that balance because everyone's telling us something instead of just embracing like that inner self. And that is what I love so much about this concept in the health space, or understanding this, because so much of health has been that chase. It's been trying to chase something down and seek it. And in body culture, it's like suck and tuck. Like there's no room for space. We're just constantly holding tension, and it's not the design of the body. And I love how you say it's just kind of sucking this energy. And when people really do feel or understand that feminine energy for what it is, not for what we've perceived it as a weakness. I think even the word surrender can be really triggering for some people. Like, I'm not going to do that.
Yes.
And then, like you said, we have this whole culture who is living it out or making it look like it's staying at home and making bread and wearing dresses. and again, it's more than just an action. It's part of you. Can you give us some examples of what this feminine part of us looks like? Like, what is this? Because I think sometimes for me, it was really refreshing to read the books, to hear the words. Sometimes it's like, I kind of get it, but I need someone to like lay it out for me.
For sure.
Can you
for
lay
sure.
that out for us? Give us a good
Yeah.
picture of it.
Yeah. So I think the most important thing to remember is femininity and feminine energy is who we are.
Mhm.
Nothing can take us away from that. No one can take it away from us. It's who we are. It's not something that we have to do. It's not something that we have to perform at. It's actually who we are at the very core of us. And a lot of things that make us feel unwell are what is taking us away from that. And so a lot of what healing is, it's pulling back these layers of what's keeping us out of alignment with who we really are, who we were designed to be. And that's what I like to preface this by saying is like, because a lot of women are so stuck in this masculine energy of this action, like do, like, okay, tell me what to do. Like, this is the next thing I'm going to conquer is feminine energy. And that is like the antithesis of what you're trying to do. Okay. So just remember, this is who you are. And if you just start to be aware and practice awareness, and really at the end of the day, tune into what your body is telling you, your body will never lie, ever. It will always tell you where you're supposed to be. So I like to break feminine energy kind of into, it's our nature, right? I like to break it into 4 archetypes. I think archetypes can sometimes be a helpful way of like giving us a visual. And so the first one is the maiden, or sometimes it's referred to as the virgin. And it's like the part of us that's very playful and youthful, and we want to be pretty and we want to take care of our looks, and we really delight in beauty and goodness and truth. That's that kind of part of us. Then we have the mother, and the mother is that nurturing side of the feminine energy and I think a lot of people think of femininity and they often just immediately equate it with weakness or softness. And that shows us how deep this goes into our society, that it's gotten even into the English language, where when you look up femininity, the dictionary or the thesaurus will bring up soft, weak. It will bring up these types of terms. And so immediately we think softness equals weakness, or we'll think, we think submission or the word surrender or letting go. These kind of feel like that's weak, right? Like you need to hold on to these things. You need to take control. You need to be who you need to be. But we have to remember that these are actually hugely difficult tasks. Surrendering is one of the hardest actions you will ever do. Letting go is one of the hardest things you will ever accomplish. Submission is a choice, meaning that, and I know we get like really like weird about that word. Oh my God. And what I mean is that in turn shows you how powerful you are, that your power, you choose to say, I'm submitting my power right now so that I don't like overtake. The thing we forget about femininity is how powerful the feminine is. It is all consuming. It is what brings life into the world. And if it was not there would be a disconnection between the divine, because it is the thing that kind of bridges the two worlds and brings life into this world from somewhere else that we don't really quite understand. And so without the feminine, life would cease to exist. And so we have the virgin or the maiden, we have the mother, and then we have the warrior, the archetype. And this is often referred to as like the warrior, or sometimes the magician, where the warrior is strong, has grit deep down in her soul. Like she can handle anything. She can sustain anything. And we see this in women, right? Just the power behind women. Like you can do anything and everything that you put your mind to, no matter how painful it is, no matter how difficult it is. But the interesting thing about the warrior is it's also kind of an alchemist, where you take your pain and you turn it into this 4th archetype, which is sometimes referred to as the crone or the wise woman, which is really the guide, where women are connected to the divine in a way that the masculine does not have the ability to. And that's why, of course, I think we think of like masculine and feminine energy as like men and women. We have to go deeper than that. Like men also have feminine energy.
Right.
But the wisdom that women are able to accomplish because of their being led by feeling is very important. So as women, we do not live up here. We are not in our heads. We are not analytical, meaning that that's not really our best place. We can, of course, be analytical. We can, of course, be in our own heads and think through things and make decisions based on thought. But how many of us can say that that's not when we make our best decisions? Like, how many times do we say, like, yeah, I should have trusted my gut on that one. Yeah, I should have trusted my gut on that one, because the feminine really comes down to its intuition and its connection to the divine, or the connection to what is out there that we don't quite comprehend, the mysterious. And so we have many facets to us, right? We have this kind of young, playful nature that really loves beauty, but there's also that really fierce mother nurturing energy that's a part of us. And then we have that deep warrior spirit. And then, of course, we have that wise woman who, it's the wisdom of age and the wisdom of our experience, where we take pain and we alchemize it into wisdom. And that really is how I like to define the feminine. The feminine is the thing that is so powerful at taking things that are very small and turning them into things that are very large. And the masculine is able to take things that are very large, big picture energy, and put it down into actionable steps. That's how I like to really simplify it, is the feminine just explodes things. We're able to take small amounts of energy and be these kind of energy converters and create life out of it, really. And that can be actual, real human beings, or it can be other types of creativity, other types of life bringing creative work. So that is really the core of us. We are these co-creators, where every cycle we live through this time where we really connect with the divine, and we're in this kind of constant connection. But the dark side of that is that we are feelers. And so feeling is not bad, but feeling everything and being very sensitive can be very difficult in this world as it is right now. That is very dark and very hard to live in for a woman who wants to be in her feminine state.
Yeah. Do you feel like feeling too much or not having any control over that pulls us more into the masculine to try and achieve some control?
Absolutely. I think fear, when we go back to the metabolic aspect of it, or the nervous system aspect of it, when we're in a constant state of fear, or even if we're just undernourished, we're not getting enough protein, carbs, and fat, we're not getting enough minerals, enough nutrients, just kind of those baseline, our blood sugar is not stable, we're going to be more prone to things like fear. We're going to be more prone to things like shame and guilt and people pleasing. A lot of people forget that people pleasing is really a reflection of fawning, which is part of that imbalanced nervous system state. It's part of the sympathetic nervous system state. So we're often, if we're kind of stuck in a chronic state of survival or chronic state of stress, which, let's be honest, I would say 95% of women are, unless they've done the work, then you are going to be in your masculine energy. And the aspect that I haven't really touched on is that our hormones actually can lead us to being in an energetic state, right? So let's say we're in a constant state of adrenaline, cortisol, pumping out testosterone. We're going to be a masculine, more of a masculine energy. We're going to feel, it's going to feel so addictive, because it's going to make us feel like we have this kind of sense of control. But then on the flip side, when we have enough progesterone, and our progesterone and estrogen is balanced, we're making testosterone in the right amounts, we're not living off of adrenaline, it's going to be much more it's going to be much easier to be in our feminine energy. So the physiological plays into the energetics, and the energetics plays into the physiology. Both are going to affect each other.
For sure. For sure. Do you feel like the masculine energy is an addiction? Do you feel like people become addicted to that as a form of survival? Or do you think it's just, we're just stuck there because we haven't found the other way?
I think it's multifaceted, because I think it can be hard in this state. I would say in the perfect world, women would be able to live kind of by their own schedules a little bit more. They would be able to have that flexibility, the softness, and we just don't really live, I think, in an economic state where that's realistic for a lot of women. And so our schedules kind of play into it. I think a lot of what women don't recognize is their power. I did pretty much my whole first season of my podcast was really about explaining to women their power. And I think a lot of women, because we're so burned out right now, when when somebody says like, we have the power to really control society, they're like, don't put that on me. Like I already have too much on my plate. Like, I'm already doing enough. But what we kind of forget is that we set the pace. And because we live in such a kind of masculine, or almost like what I call a shadow patriarchal society, where it's not true masculinity, because masculinity is very it's very gracious and it's very loving, and it's very
it's
amazing,
not what we think of as masculine.
No, it like real masculine energy is something you want to. It's like I picture it as like you're laying on the beach, like soaking up the sun, like being in the energy of a true masculine man, or in a masculine society. Like you would feel just like everything is taken care of, and like I am free to be me. But we live in a very like shadow patriarchal culture where it's like we are trying to be extracted from constantly. Everything is a transaction. Everything is what can you do for me? Yeah. Everything is like if you don't contribute to the system, like you're out of here. And that can just starve the feminine. It can just starve it to the point where you just feel like you are unimportant. And if you soften for 1 second, you're going to be eaten alive. And so I think that that's a part of it, like what's going on societally. Just our schedules and how much is on our plate, the lack of community that we have. Women were not really meant to be alone. We've always meant to be more communal beings, where we're raising each other's children. We're always gossiping, chatting, like having fun. If we're cooking together. If we're doing house tasks, we're doing it together. We've never really meant to like carry the weight of a household all on our shoulders. And then I'm seeing a lot of women now are breadwinners as well. So not only are they like doing child rearing and the mothering and the decision making and the finances, but they're also like bringing home the dough. So it's too much. Like women, it's just too much on their plate. And so I think a lot of times like a visual masculine energy, you can think of it as like a shell or a wall. And it's like that kind of hardness, that coldness that a lot of women have probably experienced in their own life, especially if they're feeling like they're stuck in that state where you have to like almost protect yourself. You build this shell, because if you didn't, you feel like you would crumble. Like you would just crumble into a million pieces and become an absolute wreck. And it's because it's the way that we kind of protect ourselves from feeling what we need to feel and softening. But what we have to start recognizing is it's not necessarily about what we do, but it's the energy that we show up in. And you don't have to necessarily partake in every little thing that society tells you. A lot of women are trying to rise up to meet societal expectations of what women should be. And I think that all those are just so messed up. Like you're just constantly doing and hustling and doing this and this and this. And it's like, clear your plate, like focus on the things that are going to make you a better woman, not a better mom or a better this or a better that, but what is going to make you a better woman? Because that in part is going to turn you into a better wife or a better partner or a better mother. So I do think that it is an addiction in a way, but I think it's more of because those hormones are addictive. Adrenaline's addictive. Cortisol's addictive. If you're living a really stressful life, testosterone's going to be addictive because it's going to give you the motivation and the hustle to keep going. If you don't have it, or you get to a place of being burned out, most women have experienced this at this point, you realize like I can't even do what I used to do. Like I can't even survive that way anymore, because it is a survival response. And so it's not, it is an addiction hormonally, but I think it goes deeper and it's a protection or a survival.
Sure. Yeah. Which those can feel so comforting, even though, a lot of our survival responses are really comforting. And that's why you see people who are like, I want to change, I want to do this, but they can't get themselves to do it because we failed to see that even the places that you don't necessarily love or not healthy are really safe and comfortable. And that's a hard concept to grasp, because it's like, why would my body go to that or respond in that way if it wasn't good for me? But we fail to see that survival is actually good too. It's just not good long term. Now, men, as we talked about, masculine energy, what we think about it, and you've described some of it, is not necessarily what it actually is. And I feel like men, we are living in a masculine world, but not a healthy masculine world either. And I feel like there's a lot of confusion for men as what does this look like? Because they're equally needing to relive or regain that healthy sense of masculinity. Can you just touch on the male archetypes?
Yeah.
What that looks like?
Yeah. So with men, it is interesting, and you're completely correct that men are suffering too. Like I think we often see the symptoms of societal problems. The symptoms begin with women because we are so much more sensitive and we feel so much. But once the men start breaking down, that's when we really start to realize like this is a societal problem, and men are very much struggling right now. And I kind of touched on this earlier, but as women, we sometimes forget the power that we have. You know, a healthy masculine. So you have the king, which is like that generous, magnanimous man who's just he just says like, you know, it's like you get a this and you get a whale and you get this and you get
Yes.
this. Like
it's giving.
Yes, generosity is really men are they thrive off of giving compliments and building people up because they are naturally builders, but they also thrive on having compliments towards them as well, of having someone acknowledge their generosity and their greatness. It's just a part of who they are. So you kind of have that archetype of the king, the very generous, giving, just loving father almost in a way. And then you have the warrior, right? The fierce part of men, which is that they are there to protect, to provide. Like they are there and they're going to do what it takes. And it's not about what's in front of them, but it's about what's behind them and protecting what's behind them. They're there to take the brunt of the weight. And then you have the magician, which is kind of like that one's kind of misunderstood, but it's really like their ability to use wisdom to and what they learn and knowledge to be creative, to figure things out. And we see this a lot, right? It's so fun to see. And then of course we have that like kind of boy or the boyish part of them, the play. It's often referred to as the lover because they are very much a lot of people don't think of men as sensitive, but they actually are almost more sensitive and they thrive off of physical touch and being almost like, I hate to use the word worshipped because I think women need to be worshipped in a way and men need to be worshipped by each other, but they really thrive off of loving and giving love and receiving love. And I don't think we think of the masculine that way. Like we don't think of them as generous and giving and loving and all of these things. And that's really what healthy masculine energy looks like. But the one thing about men specifically, but also the masculine, is it needs a purpose because it is very action based, right? And what is the masculine's purpose? Well, it's to protect the feminine. And so without the feminine, masculine energy completely loses its purpose. The masculine energy is there to support and be there for the feminine. And without it, it loses its purpose. And that's what we're seeing in our society today. That is the symptom. As women have stepped into more masculine roles and left femininity behind, the masculine has to step into its feminine energy because a true man will not compete with a woman. A true man will not be head to head and toe to toe and be like, I'm going to be in my masculine energy and you're going to be in your masculine energy. If a woman steps into her masculine energy and is living in it, well, a masculine or a true man is actually going to step into his feminine energy. And he's not going to like it. It's not going to feel good. But that is kind of the nature of men, is they will step aside and say, okay, this is what you want. Like, I'm going to step aside. And so you naturally begin to see the family structure as men or as women step into a masculine role. Men become a lot more passive. They become a lot more just kind of like, whatever, like you do you, because the woman has said, well, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do it my way. And if you don't do it my way, then you're not going to do it at all. And it takes away a man's purpose and it takes away the masculine's purpose. And so that's kind of what we're seeing today is if we want to heal men or heal the masculine, we have to do the work and step into the feminine. And I know there's some resentment when I say that. I've said that a lot. And I think women sometimes get resentful of that, or they say, why is it all on me? And it's not all on you. Of course not. But there is a natural order to things. And unfortunately, with our amount of power that we have complete power over our family, the energy within our household, and also society as a whole. If we want to see more masculinity in our home, especially from our men, then we need to step into our feminine energy, and we will naturally see the masculine begin to thrive as we step into our feminine energy. It's a natural occurrence. It's not something that needs to be forced or even taught.
Yeah. And I think that there's something so profound that happens when you can get to that place. And I can't say that like I'm perfect at this either. You know, like this is I feel like a concept that takes time and work. But I started thinking about it in the form of like co-regulation. Like our energy, like being in the feminine is not a fight with the masculine. That's not how it was intended. But it's like a co-regulation. If I can help and step into my feminine energy and I can increase my energy, like our energies are co-regulating each other all the time, right? Like,
Exactly.
you know, we have these ideas about self-regulation, but we're always really co-regulating with something or someone. And it's always an interaction. And I think about it in like that powerful way of like, if I can start surrendering, if I can soften a little bit, if I can really start to embrace this feminine side of me, that's not a weakening. That's a power that I can give out.
Right.
That helps then other people to start to also regulate, because there is that safety of like, when we're out of balance, we also become a little unsafe. It's like why people are like, oh, there's toxic people, right? Or their vibes are off. Like we have all kinds of words for it without actually saying it, but it is that imbalance. So as we kind of, you know, wrap up this show, what would it look like to embrace it? Like, what are some ways that you've worked to embrace this? And I know that women want to do this. People ask me all the time for lists of everything, but that's really not the point. But can you give us some ways that maybe even you started to process through this and started to implement some of this in your life to take back some of those layers of protection and really soften in this area?
For sure, for sure. I think it does start with a kind of an awareness, and there is almost like a personal accountability there. I think a lot of times, I think culturally as women, we're kind of trained from a young age. I mean, how many of us are told you can do anything you want, be anything you want, right? Like you're gonna do great things. And you know, when the little 4-year-old says like, I want to be a wife and a mommy, it's like, well, you can dream bigger if you want to. And that's like it's kind of gaslighty a little bit.
Yeah.
And so we have to really get real with the amount of programming that we have been given about what we actually value. And this is hard work. This is not something where like one day you're like, oh, actually I was valuing achievement and success because my father showed me that was the most important thing, or whatever it might be. But it's practicing awareness around our behaviors. Like, are we doing behaviors that we actually don't want to be doing, but we're almost like compulsory doing? Like a lot of women do these kind of compulsive behaviors. We're like, I need to wake up and I need to clean the house and I need to like treat life like it's like a 9 to 5 and you're serving like like the corporate man. And depending on what your lifestyle is, I think this is very important, because if you're someone that's waking up and you have to get out the door and get going, you're going to probably be a little bit more in your masculine energy because you don't have as much space to kind of create this softness and this flow within your routine. But but you can still create space. And I always say, like, try to create space in your schedule. This is the first thing. So instead of scheduling yourself every second of every day, where can you actually say no? And where can you actually create more space to just do nothing? And stop having a negative connotation with doing nothing. Nothing is where the magic truly happens. That's where you actually are creating space for all the pieces to fall together. And that's a really hard practice, but it's no more and creating more space in your schedule. Instead of like being like, oh, I have a free day here. Like, what can I do here? Can you just like be and just go with the flow and be intuitive about your day? Like, when you have that chance, take it. And if you are like more of a stay-at-home mom, or you have a little bit more space in your schedule, where are you showing up and saying like, oh, I need to be doing this, I need to be doing this, or I should be doing this? Like, really focus on where the needs are and the shoulds are. And do you really need to do it right at this moment? Or do you trust that it will take care of itself? Like, you're going to do the dishes. Does it need to get done right now? And is that urgent, hurried energy really impacting you and your whole family very well?
Yeah.
Or are you just doing it because you have this like internal expectation of yourself? So really just focusing on the energy that you show up doing things in. And then the last thing that I really practiced, and I think this is so important for women, is how can you do everything just a little bit slower? Like, there's this book, it's called A 7% Slower. And I think that that is just like a great little like, oh, how could I do this 10% slower or 7% slower? Like if you're just doing the dishes, like, are you just like rushing through and just like hurrying through doing the dishes? Or are you just like doing the dishes? Like, where do you have to be next? And then if you're like, well, I am kind of scheduled back to back, then that goes back to how much space can I actually create my schedule? I need to create more space because if I have to do everything in a really urgent, hurried manner, what is that translating to my body? What is that communicating to my body? That like there's never enough time in the day. And I think that's where what a lot of women think. We have this underlying feeling of like there's just never enough time to do everything that we need to get done. It's like what actually needs to get done? What actually does? Do the floors really need to get clean today? Do you really have to dust today? Like these are things that are important, of course, and you should do them, but you don't have to do them in like an urgent, rushed manner. You're your own boss in a way. So I would say that those are kind of the main things: is slowing down, really trying to be in the present moment, not every time you catch yourself living in the future or the past. And I have had a lot of conversations with women who say, well, if I don't think of these things, no one will. And that is to me a sign whenever you're taking everything on your shoulder, so you're really not connected to the divine. You're not connected to your higher power. You're not connected to something bigger than yourselves. You have no trust. You are not surrendered. You haven't let go. You think that you have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. And I'm going to just let you in on a little secret. You can't do it. You're not a psychic. You don't see the big picture, and you probably don't know what's going to actually happen. Like how many times do we just say like, oh, that went way better than I thought it was going to go. Yeah. It's like, can you imagine if you didn't waste all the energy worrying about how it was possibly going to go and just let it happen how it was supposed to? You would have probably shown up in a much better state. So those are kind of like the basics. And that's where it starts, because once you're aware, it's very hard to be unaware. And if you are in a relationship, a bonus is start to pay attention to the dynamics within your relationship. When you show up in like kind of a harsh competitive spirit, are you like really having the best conversations with your partner? Are you really like jiving, or are you just like feeling like you're not connected? And that can be really helpful too. Like I feel like if you're in a relationship, you have that advantage where you can really start to see the dynamics and be like, oh, like I can show up a lot differently, and wow, like how different does that result?
Yeah. And I think competition is always a great sign that we're out of balance, or when our ego becomes too inflated, it's just a sign that we're really pushing that survival response of feeling dysregulated. And those are good. Like, again, knowing some of these triggers, knowing some of these places that you are out of balance can help remind you that these are the things that you can do to create that space to soften. I was trying to think of like some good examples of feminine energy. And I always go back to the story of Mary and Martha in the Bible. And I used to hate this story because I was like, I cannot understand why Mary got all the credit. Like she was just chilling there, chatting and being relational, and like Martha's doing all the work. And for so much of my life, I so related to her. And I feel like it is a good portrayal even of like the biblical essence of that feminine energy is not hustle, hustle, hustle. There is that huge relational component of slowing down and being in the moment and softening to that. And so I kind of like to think about it in that, like, I feel like that's a good kind of black and white example. But sometimes it is like pinpointing people in life for me have been like, oh, wow, they really embody that. Like that feels safe, that feels warm, like creating that sense of safety around it instead of it being these big words or these weaknesses or whatever, like the portrayal, trying to see that in a different way. And I think just looking around and finding those women and even the men in life who are really embodying that essence, for me, has helped me to desire it. To want it. Okay, we have covered so much, and you have a lot more about this information on your newer podcast.
Yes.
And you have more information on Instagram. You also have a course. Can you fill us in on where we can learn more about you and diving in with the work that you have?
Yeah, like if you're really interested in this type of content, check out my podcast. It's called the Fully Nourished Podcast. I also am really pretty active on Instagram, so come follow me at Jessica Ash Wellness. I have a website as well, jessicaashwellness.com. I have a signature course that really teaches the fundamentals of nourishment, but it's actually under construction right now. So just kind of keep checking back because it's a whole new like revamp and facelift. But come follow me on Instagram and follow the podcast.
That sounds awesome. I will make sure and link all of that up in the show notes. But thank you so much for being here, Jessica. It was a true honor to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, Alexa.
I love this topic, and I'm so honored Jessica came on the show. Do not forget to go follow her at jessicaashwellness.com or on social media at jessicaashwellness. I will tell you, she has a new podcast, and she's talking all about this subject. So if you want to learn more, again, find her on Apple Podcasts or YouTube, and that's the Fully Nourished Podcast. Okay, that is it for today's episode. If you want to learn more, head on over to thelivingwell.com/335, where I share the 4 different archetypes of feminine energy and how to utilize those or live those out to create the essence of that within you over in that blog post. So head on over there and then tune in next week for a brand new podcast. I'll see you back here then.